Everyone. Welcome
Hello.
to our Return of the Sorcerer live show. I am so excited. I've got two of my very good friends here to talk about this really crazy, really great book. So, do you guys want to quickly introduce yourself and your channel? And then we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty stuff. Okay.
Go for it, Stephanie.
I was the only person who didn't put my channel name in my banner. My channel is Miss Richards Reads, and I read a little of everything, but mainly fantasy and classics. And I am so excited to be here to talk about this book. And
All right, I am Christy Lewis, and my channel is Christy Lewis Dostoevsky in Space. And I really like classics as well, especially like anything about Russia. And I also really like science fiction and fantasy, and apparently horror. I didn't really know I liked horror, but I loved this collection, so I'm very excited to discuss it with my friends.
A fun anecdote. For the longest time, I thought Christy's channel name was Christy Lost Dostoevsky in Space. And in my head, I always referred to it that. And I think I referred to it that in a couple videos when I talked about it a couple times. And then I started paying closer. And then someone was like, Christy Lewis. And I'm like, oh, it's not. I thought she had the most clever channel name ever. I was like, that's an amazing channal name.
Thank you.
I mean, it's still an amazing channel name, but
Andrew
that's my fun anecdote.
messes up people's channel names, especially Noah's. He can't get it right.
I can't get that one right either. It's so hard.
Or Alan's.
Yes.
Yeah.
It took me the longest time to be able to say Alexandria. I have to slow myself down every time I do it.
Oh my goodness.
Well, so the Return of the Sorcerer. Do we want to talk about just general thoughts first, or do we want to just jump into short stories?
We could give a few general thoughts just to give people an idea of what to expect.
Yeah. Probably a good idea.
Because some of us went in blind and weren't prepared.
Yes. For the wildness.
Yeah. So the way that I describe this book to people when I'm trying to not give away spoilers is that it's horror, sci-fi, fantasy, craziness that goes on, but also really amazing description and language use that you're reading it and you're enjoying it. It's one of those books that I feel does better when you reflect on it instead of just reading it straight through and think about it as you're reading it. I would read a story and then I would sit there and I would think about it, and I enjoyed the material more when I thought about it than when I actually read it, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have to it takes some work to kind of grasp with your imagination what is being discussed. But when you do, it's that's pretty cool. This is actually fun, but it can take a little while to get into the stories.
Yeah. He's got amazing imagination to write all of these stories in one collection. One writer could write a whole series of books on just one of these stories. But he wrote all of the stories under his imagination and writing, and I'm how
and he
how
wrote
did
it all in the 1930s, in 5 years. It's that was when he wrote
really impressive.
Did he sleep at night?
I think he was pretty broke. I don't think he slept very much. Maybe that's why it was wild, Stephanie. Maybe he wasn't drunk. He wasn't drunk or on drugs. He was just getting no sleep. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I really liked his language. It was very atmospheric, and I had no problem envisioning anything he was talking about.
Yeah.
some of which was very macabre and gross, but written very beautifully. And it kind of reminded me of Stephen Graham Jones, just a little more archaic language,
Yep.
which I thought was cool.
I love that you use the word beautiful, because like you wouldn't necessarily go into a horror book being like, all right, I'm ready for some beautiful, like just mind elevating beauty here. But like it's really there. It's really gorgeous writing.
Yeah, his word choice is fantastic.
Yes, it really is.
And like the names he picked felt very purposeful. And not just some random name he threw in there.
Yeah, the names were like, you could tell he put a lot of thought into each one of the names that both the names of like the stories, the titles, and the names of the characters and the places and the creatures that he created. Like you could tell that he didn't just write these stories on a whim, that he put everything he had into these stories. And I could really, coming from a pseudo writer's background, I could really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So yeah, it's like I don't remember how many short stories it is, but the collection seems most like, I'm not sure if they chose the stories necessarily around necromancy, or if he just like writes a lot about necromancy, but like that was a serious theme in this book, necromancers. And I don't want to spoil things, but usually one thing happens to necromancers in these stories in various different ways, but they always go in the same direction.
Yes.
So there's a theme.
Yes.
Lots of dark macabre stuff, but also beautiful still.
Yeah.
And ancientness is another theme, like just age in general. Like there's a lot of like ancient civilization type stuff, and like he quotes a lot of mythology and like Faustus, and you know, like he really kind of harkens back to his inspirations, probably, I guess is where he's getting them.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and really unique stories, most of them. Like ideas. I'd never read anything like it before.
Yeah. Definitely never read anything like it before. Like I went into this completely blind, not having any idea what I was going to be reading. And I was like, this is a really sweet cover. So I was like, it reminds me of like the old, fantasy covers that you would see. I'm like, okay, I could be down for this. And I'm like, Christy is recommending it, so it can't be bad.
Yes. And that's what I was thinking. It was going to be more fantasy. And then I read the first story and I'm like, what did I just read? Like, Christy picked this.
I was like, what is Christy getting us into?
This was not a Hufflepuff book.
No.
Totally not.
Definitely a Slytherin book.
Christy was talking about like the ancient civilizations, and I could be remembering this totally wrong because it's been like a month since I've read this. But like from my memory, I remember there being at least one story where it's talking about like these ancient civilizations, but it's like in the future kind of, or in like another world that felt like the future. And I thought that idea was like so wild and crazy that we have like these ancient civilizations, but they're in like our future.
Mm-hmm. So much age, so much time. I love that. I love that. And like, there's one story where it's another dimension, like occupying the same space, but it's totally different. It's like you go through like these gates, and the way it was like A Wrinkle in Time kind of is what it reminded me of, but it was actually the same space. It was so cool. Just so many like mind bending moments like that where you're just like, how did you come up with this? Is this science? Is it sorcery? And actually, in the description of him, there's like an introduction in here, and it talks about how he was a sculptor as well, and he would often sculpt like kind of creepy stuff, creepy heads, and like demon heads, and like stuff like that. It's like, you, where are you getting this stuff?
Imagine being his girlfriend and coming over to Eden's house for dinner and just seeing demon heads everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
And yes, Urza, it is a short story collection.
Yes.
Yes.
A crazy short story collection.
Oh,
Yeah.
But it's also like some of the stories were like could be stories on their own, but there were other stories that were kind of like a series of stories that dealt with the same world and the same characters.
Mm-hmm.
Philip Chastain showed up in at like one at the end, and he was also in one at the very beginning, and then the one before that was connected with that story, and it was like, are we getting a Stephen King universe here?
I remember reading that, and I was like, wait, wasn't that a guy from beginning?
Yeah.
What is he doing back here now? He didn't get enough.
Surprise.
Surprise cameo.
Yeah. And a variety of things. Very mummies, skeletons, necromancy,
skeleton servants, dinosaurs.
There were zombie bats from Mars.
Yes.
Martian zombie bats.
Yes.
So great. A lot of it, I didn't even... so there was one story about the Martian zombie bats where Kate was cracking up over the story while I was sitting there reading it like in dread. Like I had to take breaks. I was like, I can't read this at night. It's so scary. And then I listened to Kate's Vox and I was like, what did she think of the vaults of Yobombus? And she was like, oh, I just was picturing these, you know, kind of cliche, like these films, you know, like the older horror films where it's really funny to watch because the special effects suck, you know. Like
little string.
Which is so funny because I am not a scary movie person at all. Like I scare myself at night. Like I'm the type of person that like one of my favorite TV shows to watch is Criminal Minds, but I have to watch it like in the middle of the day. Sunlight, all the lights on. With like music playing in the background so I don't scare. Otherwise, I will not be able to sleep at night. But for some reason, like
this.
Well, I went into it blind. I didn't know how scary it was going to be. And this is actually my second horror book. This is my second horror book I read in the month of June.
Oh, it is.
Because I read The Patience of a Dead Man, which was scary in a totally different sense. And that one I had like jump scares while reading it. This one was like stay up at night having weird nightmares scary. Patience of a Dead Man was like
Yeah, this one felt very I haven't read it, so I hate to use the word nostalgia, but like one of those books I could see myself as a kid like staying up late under the covers reading it.
Yeah. Because
it's so spooky. And nothing like horror I would read today.
This one was more like psychedelic to me.
Yeah, very phantasmagoric.
That was one of my first thoughts when I finished this book was, did he do drugs?
Would not surprise me.
Yeah.
Would not.
Which is not a complaint. It added to the imagination if he did.
He did a good job, whatever he did to do it.
Yeah. Some of it felt like an acid trip, I'm not going to lie.
So wild. Oh, goodness.
Spooky.
He often did like spiritual themes. I don't read like modern horror, so I don't know if a lot of modern horror does like quite so much with spiritual realm, but this one was like heavily spiritual. Like almost every other story was a necromancer doing something with the black arts, you know. Something horrifying.
Not your normal necromancer.
Yeah.
I kind of enjoyed the occult stuff though, which that stuff fascinates me. So the first story I was like, ooh. I think the words you used, Christy, were deliciously creepy, which I think
Yeah.
is perfect.
Yeah.
Exactly. Did you? Okay, I really wanted to hear, Stephanie, if you, I didn't prepare you ahead of time by telling you I really wanted to hear your thoughts on this, but do you remember the one about the chain where the guy
Oh,
is
yeah.
like, at the very beginning of the story, this guy is just randomly found with like a burn around his body that looks like a coil, and you learn stuff. I don't, should we move into spoilers? I don't know.
Yeah, we
Should
can move into
No, we can do
spoilers.
spoilers. I read
Okay.
a bunch of them together, so I'm trying to remember which one it is.
All the specifics. Yeah, I know.
We're probably going to
remember
lose
the
our one
imagery.
audience member now.
An audience member. Yeah, I remember the imagery.
Yes.
And
Okay. Yeah, the chain of it's the one where it turns out he was using a drug, big surprise,
Oh, really?
to look back into past lives, and he goes like back to the beginning, like in like, I don't know, way earlier. There's like a whole nother people group with their own gods that we've never heard of or anything, and the coil was like a punishment for crossing the gods, like committing not like saying something bad against the god,
like blasphemy.
Yeah, like blasphemy.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just thought it was like, this is, I wonder, because I know you said you were enjoying the occult stuff, and I was like, this might, maybe this one would capture her attention, but it doesn't sound like it did.
I'll be honest, I read so many of these together, I didn't space it out, so I think some of them blended.
Yeah, that happens if you read them fast.
Yeah. But I remembered the coil, like that one was really like kind of an intense visual.
Yeah. I loved that one like so much. I feel like, I don't think Kate, what did you think of that one?
I think
I'm just throwing it at you. I'm sorry. This was one of my favorite ones.
I think I felt similar to Stephanie in that like it was really good imagery. I was down with the imagery, and I could like visualize the whole story.
Yeah.
But I think that was like one of the middle ones where I was feeling literary jet lag.
Yeah.
And so I think I would enjoy it more on a reread, where I'm not trying to push this out in just 2 weeks time.
Do it for the readathon.
Yeah, it does remind me a little of, which we keep comparing, but have you read The Diviners, the first book in that series?
I haven't.
Okay.
No.
I really like it because it's creepy and deals with the occult, but there's a lot of imagery kind of like that, like some bodies are posed in a specific way to symbolize something, and it kind of reminded me of that. And it kind of, it tied to like religious, not like mainstream, but like religious themes,
occult
and stuff.
things.
Yeah. And it was, I liked seeing, even though they weren't related, I liked seeing those connections and like, oh, this reminds me of this, or oh, this reminds me of this author. And and just the imagery was fantastic, and the way he described stuff.
Was this, I'm looking at my notes now, was this the one where he used the journal entries?
There were several of those, but
right. Well, I have the chain of Afro-Gammon. Okay, I have journal entries. Yeah, now I'm remembering it, looking at my notes, because what I really liked about
sorry,
this one,
I didn't even tell you the title, did I?
That's okay. No, it's okay. I was like, wait, which one was this? What I liked most about this one was that he took these journal entries of our character and wrote about like normal everyday stuff. Like in one of the journal entries, he was writing about Paradise Lost, and I'm like, oh, I know that book. And so it's like this crazy, fantastical, bizarro world where like we have these normal journal entries that mix like the normalness with the craziness, and like that was kind of like a almost like a metaphor for this book. I felt like you have a little bit of normal but a lot of crazy, and it's all mixed together so you don't know what's what.
Yeah, and it works somehow. Yes.
Yes. It's a strange brew, a strange concoction.
Yes.
Do you guys have like a favorite story that you like really loved?
I mean, the one that sticks in my mind the most is honestly the first one. And I don't know if it's just because I wasn't expecting it and that's why it stuck with me. But the whole like random body parts
Right?
moving
That
and
turned out to be his brother.
Crawling across the floor.
and crawling across the floor. It like I still think about that story. I think that one's probably my favorite.
That one is the titular story of the collection. So clearly a lot of people connected with that one. So for anybody watching later, The Return of the Sorcerer is about this scholar who's like super broke, and he goes to stay with another scholar who turns out to be, big surprise, a necromancer. He really enjoys studying evil in all of its cultures, demons and stuff like that. And there's some weird noises happening in the workshop and like in this dark, creepy house where nobody else lives. And he only to find out it's body parts making the noise, dismembered body parts, like crawling down the stairs and stuff. Like there's a hand at one point that crawls down the stairs. And we find out that the guy who hired our narrator, the scholar, he killed his brother because his brother was like more favored by the higher powers, and he was jealous, and he was like, I want that power, so I'm going to kill my brother. And this is the brother, the sorcerer is returning to enact his revenge on the murderous brother. I think they were twins.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's the story.
What was the one where the writer brought along his illustrator?
Yes, I love that one too.
I loved that one so
Oh my
much because he's
gosh.
like, this is a crazy world. I need this in pictures. So let me go back to the real world and get my illustrator dude and bring him back to this
sell
world.
a lot of copies.
Yeah. That would be me. It's like, I can't draw. I'm going to need you to come with me. And my best friend is an artist, and he's like scared of everything. It would be so funny. I would love that.
I think that was one of my favorites.
Yeah,
I also really enjoyed like the two Singing Flame ones. Story 2 and Story 3, City of the Singing Flame, and then
that's
Beyond
the
the
one.
Singing Flame. Oh, that's the same one.
So these are the ones with Philip Hastain as well.
Yes.
So the City of the Singing Flame is where I forget. So it's a little confusing because it's like all written in letters. So there's this mystery where a researcher in the area disappeared. And so his friend comes and reads his journal entries from like the weeks before he disappears. And it turns out that this guy has been wandering around this area that looks like there should be volcanic activity around here. There's like volcanic rocks, but there's no sign of volcanic activity. So there's something kind of weird going on. And he finds like these, I think, pillars. Yeah. And if you walk through the pillars, this is the Wrinkle in Time story, where it brings you into the other dimension, and like a moth to a flame, there's this flame in this city. And if you go towards the flame, it sings to you and it draws you in like you're a moth, and then you jump into it and immolate yourself. Like that's what everybody around him is doing. But like Odysseus, he clogged his ears so that he wouldn't jump into the flame, and he escaped. But then he went back and brought his illustrator, and they both disappeared. Because that's what you do.
That's another thing I like about this, though. Like, we keep, like Odysseus, or it reminds me of the Diviners, or, like,
Yeah.
I think it was one of those with the moth that reminded me of Kafka.
Mhm.
And even though they're not copies, I think it's so cool how it permeates to different genres.
Yeah.
Even though this is a horror novel.
Totally.
And that made it extra fun for me.
There were like,
Yes.
in general, I have a hard time picking favorites in anything, but there were like some stories that I would say, like, I don't know that I could say like this one story is my favorite story, but there were like a handful of stories that were my favorites over others.
Yeah.
And there was like certain things in stories that I enjoyed over others. Like the devotee of evil was fascinating just because there's like this one character that's devoted to studying all forms of evil. And I'm like,
Necromancer.
I've never seen this before. Like, any kind of evil you could ever think of, this dude has studied it and knows it. And then he becomes
Turns into a
and then the last story, I really liked the Enchantress of Solney or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
The very last story in the collection, because to me this felt like kind of like a metaphor for the entire book, where like you have this character in front of you, this woman that looks one way, and then like when our characters got to know her, they saw like a whole different being, the enchantress, and it's like it's not all that it appears to the eye type of thing seeing. And it's like you just like peel back the layers of these stories, and there's more, and then there's more layers to peel back, and then there's even more, and it just keeps going. It's like the book that keeps giving.
He doesn't really do the expected thing like ever.
No.
Everything is unexpected.
Yes.
We had dinosaurs in one of these stories.
Yes. Yeah.
Still,
It's amazing. What did you? Okay, the one that I just read today that like stood out to me so strongly was the disinterment of Venus. So this is set in like a monastery, and these monks find a statue of Venus. And it's just so intriguing. It's a naked woman. The monks can't handle it. And it's like got this magical draw. And so they all end up going wild. They like go into the town and meet up with some prostitutes, and like they just can't handle it. And everybody is freaking out, like, okay, we need to destroy this statue. So the most upright among them goes to destroy the statue with a hammer. And the next morning they find him in the embrace of the statue, in amorous embrace, and they have fallen together back down into the pit where she was found, and he is crushed beneath her in this amorous embrace. And that is the end of this story.
That's
I just think it's so great.
That was one of those stories that I just laughed through the whole thing.
They couldn't handle it.
I was laughing too.
They're like, ooh, this statue. She has no clothes on. What do we do? Naked woman we've never seen in statue form.
Let's go full on Sodom and Gomorrah.
Oh my gosh. So great. Can't handle it. I think so. It said in the introduction that they cut out some sexual material because he was writing in the 30s. But Gene Wolfe was like, man, I wish they had left in the sexual material. Like, I feel like you can kind of tell which stories like probably had some sexual material in it that they had to cut out.
Yeah.
And I feel like, that
I kind of want to know now, because at the
That
time,
was probably
like, was it the same as it would be now, or is it like, ooh, I saw her ankle, or
right?
Common teenage boy you're describing.
Yeah.
I can't handle the naked statue.
The magical draw? Yes.
And then the best part of that all is though that the most righteous of them ends up in the embrace of the statue, and that's how he dies.
Yes.
And like you throw the holy water on him and it like he turns black and so great. He's been given over to evil for his lustfulness.
And that's like, for me, that's one of the reasons why I found this book, even though it was completely terrifying, but it was also completely hilarious. And I was laughing through a lot of these stories because they are so like nonsensical and so crazy that my only reaction was to laugh. Like any other writer writing these stories, they would have been 100% creep me out. I like probably would not have made it through reading this book because I would be too scared. But the way that he writes, like he writes totally creepy and totally scary and weird and strange, but also with this language that is like, you know, it's supposed to be horror, but it's also, you know, you're not supposed to take it seriously. You know what I mean? Like
you can tell he's having a good time with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, let me just throw this at the readers and see how they deal with this.
Yeah, he likes to play with the readers.
Yes.
And I was reading this and audibly going, what? Or what did I just read?
Some of the stories seemed like so serious to me, like, oh, he respects these powers, like they're just dangerous. And then you have stories like the disinterment of Venus. It's just like the funniest thing ever. And after you started laughing at the vaults of Yvonne, I felt the same way.
I have laughter written in my notes for the vaults of Yovanbis. That was my note for that. Martian civilization, laughter.
Oh my gosh.
I want to see a Martian zombie bat now. I want someone to draw that for me.
But like behind, yeah. Oh, I thought you meant in real life. I was like behind the glass though.
Oh yeah, definitely behind the glass.
Let's bring our illustrator in on this.
Yeah. Now it cracked me up, Kate, when you were like, "I loved the Isle of the Torturers," because that's
I wrote humor.
Oh my gosh, that story was so creepy.
I don't know why I found it so funny. But it might have just been like lack of sleep delirium too.
I think I was feeling a little like beleaguered at that point because I'd been trying to cram all these in, and then I heard Kate's message that she was just cracking up at it, and I'm like, maybe I just missed something. But you were reading them more spread out than I was.
Or maybe I just totally misread it.
I love that you found so much humor in them. I think that's awesome. That makes me happy. It also had never occurred to me what Stephanie contributed to this conversation, which is that he probably took some drugs. Like that didn't even occur to me, even when I was reading a story about a guy taking drugs and learning about his past lives and stuff.
Same. And I was like, this is totally like psychedelic, and never once until Stephanie brought that up did I think like he had some kind of help with these stories. I just thought he was like, his imagination was just that crazy.
Yeah,
I was jealous of it.
A lot of 60s music, so
yeah.
As soon
as you said that though, I'm like, oh yeah, could very possibly be.
I did read it like more seriously because it was like always the necromancer getting his comeuppance in a world where necromancy was not allowed. So I was just like, it seemed like a theme of like, don't mess with this stuff, you know, might have been prevalent, but then like, again, so much humor. It's really hard to tell where he's coming from. I don't know anything about his personal beliefs. So you can just interpret these as wildly as you want. They are from Weird Tales. He wrote in Weird. Did we say this on the stream? Mm-hmm. He wrote in Weird Tales with.
Oh right.
What's that guy's name again? The horror guy.
Lovecraft.
Yeah, Lovecraft. Yeah. He wrote with Lovecraft on Weird Tales. So I mean, it's supposed to be weird.
He kind of reminds me of. This is gonna sound really weird, I think. But like as we're talking, I'm thinking like I feel like he would get along really well with Hunter S. Thompson.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Even if he didn't do drugs, you know, or any of that, they just feel like those two personalities would be amazing in a room together. Having those two
They
guys
would
at a party
vibe.
together.
I think they would vibe.
That would
Yeah.
be amazing.
Oh, Urza, some of the stories were a little bit hard to read.
Yeah.
And I don't, it was usually when he was writing kind of like older feeling fantasy, like it was just hard to get into some of them. Usually when you got into them, like there was a lot of really cool atmospheric stuff happening. It was cool, but like one of the most famous ones, because another of his short story collections was named after it. What is it? The Dark Eidolon. That one I never was able to wrap my mind around because the language felt so archaic, and I was just like, this one is so famous. Like I thought I was gonna love it.
Yeah,
I
my
kept
mind
bouncing
got
off.
too like distracted with all of the details and trying to figure out what I'm supposed to pay attention to in that one.
Mhm.
But one of the other ones I was able to pay attention to a lot easier that had like really great atmosphere, I thought, was the Double Shadow,
Mhm.
which built really great atmosphere, and that's where we have our magical mummies, if I remember correctly.
Ah, yes, yes.
Everybody loves a good magical mummy.
Yeah.
There was like this very specific formula that you had to get.
That was amazing. Yeah. I don't even remember the plot of that one now, but it was like there was two sorcerer type guys. I wrote down their names because when Stephanie had mentioned he has some really cool names, I was like, oh yeah, this story had a Victes and Farpatron. I think is how you say them. And they were like buddies, and they got into
I was
some
saying that with
scary
a
stuff.
straight face.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Yes,
Farpatron.
I was cracking up at that name too. I was like, this is so like pulpy science fiction name. And then in another story, you get like Theodopolis, and it's so random.
Yes.
So I don't know how accurate this is because it's on Wikipedia. But it says that he suffered from agoraphobia and he had an eidetic memory.
Ooh.
Which I think is really interesting. And he really liked poetry.
Yes, he was a poet.
Right?
Yeah,
you
it
could
did
tell
say
that in
that.
his language. Yes.
Yeah. And he was like a really, they said in here that he was writing really flowery poetry that would have been published like 40 years earlier, you know? But it was too flowery for the time that he was writing in the 30s. You know, nobody wanted to read that
Right.
flowery. You could see that in some of the stories for sure.
Poor guy.
Poor guy. And
Yeah.
also, he chased the women apparently in his IRL. So that was another thing they threw into the introduction. He really liked women a lot. I'm not sure, like, it doesn't say he was ever like arrested or did anything bad, but yeah.
He just liked the ladies.
And you can tell that the ladies in these stories are not like, in any sense of the word, interesting characters. Yeah. Like, they're just not. They're usually there for being sexy. One is literally mute and falling at the feet of her marbleized, like her husband, her boyfriend. I don't know. Whatever he was to her was turned into stone, and she's just pretty much there to be like a mourner for him. And the women don't really speak.
Except for the Enchantress.
Except for what?
The Enchantress.
The Enchantress. Oh yeah,
The
in the
last
last story. Yes, very true.
She's
And
like the one
I think
woman
the alien.
girl.
Yeah,
The alien, yes.
the
Yeah.
aliens.
Yeah, there's.
But again, they were there for sexual reasons. The alien was, and then there was another one with a woman as well, where she brought him back in time. I forget what story that was, but yeah, she was bringing her dude back in time because she just pretty much wanted him to
Yeah.
play fun games with her.
I'm
bored.
I
I'm
think
just
that's
gonna bring this guy monk
Yeah.
back here.
Yes.
Was that the one with the time traveling vials?
Yeah.
Where like
Yeah.
one like took you to a very specific time in the future.
Yeah.
And one took you back.
And if you
Knowing
add a
me,
little
I
bit
would like
more,
drink the
he
wrong
went,
one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she was like, "Yeah, I did that on purpose." So I missed you
And that
too.
story. Oh, I'm sorry.
Good.
I was gonna say it started out in such a different way too. Like
Yeah.
that was such a twist I didn't see coming. Like I thought it was gonna be about another necromancer getting his comeuppance, but the necromancer actually got away with it in that one. It was like, oh, this is actually about a female enchantress bringing a monk from the future to be her plaything. All right,
Surprise.
surprise.
Yeah, choices were made for sure.
Choices were made.
That wasn't an
Oh.
accidental overdose.
Yeah, no.
I love that she just straight out admits it too. When he comes back, she's like, "Oh yeah, I know how to work the formula, and I did that on purpose." It wasn't like, "Oops, my
Yeah.
bad." She's like, "Oh, I totally did that."
He didn't seem too sad about it. He was
No.
kind of like, oh, I wanted to come back. Like,
Right,
there
it
was
felt like he
nothing for
wanted
me.
to be back there anyway. So
Yeah.
I mean, once you've gone to a different time and you've
Yeah.
gotten to know those people, it's kind of like
Outlander.
50 Shades.
I'm
Yes.
sorry. I was laughing at the comment.
I know.
50 Shades of Sorcerer. That's hilarious.
Yes.
There's some of that. Yeah,
Some of
but
that
it's
going on.
all edited very.
Yeah. Very.
There's nothing.
Fade to black type.
Tastefully.
Yeah. I don't even know
Okay.
if I would say tasteful.
Yeah,
It was
that's a
not,
question
not
mark,
really
question mark, question mark.
tasteful.
Not
but-
tasteful.
No.
Yeah.
That's
Family
why
representation, not great.
I want to know what they cut out just because of my own morbid curiosity.
Right?
And it would probably make me angry if I read it, but then I would know.
Probably. Yeah, like Gene Wolfe was like, man, they should have left it in there. And I'm like, I don't know if I don't know. I might not have loved these stories if they had left
Especially
that
like
in
for
there.
the 30s, like
Yeah.
Yeah. For
Oh,
sure.
man.
another one of the stories that I liked because it was totally different and it gave you like that really crazy imagination was the Empire of the Necromancers. Because it kind of like, at least for my very limited experience in these kinds of books, it gave you a totally different side to the necromancers than you normally see. Like we got to see things from, you know, their point of view and their motivations and stuff. Instead of like trying to take down the necromancer, we like were the necromancers and essentially in that story. And I just
'Cause
like
in a lot of-
seeing, you know, that other side.
Yeah, and that was really different even from what he wrote in a lot of these cases. A lot of times it was like a person off to the side who was like, oh, this guy's a necromancer. He's doing some stuff. But in this case, we were actually following the necromancer until the story took a hard left and went into the head of the walking skeletons that he animated. Like, oh, so that's
Skeleton
the main
servants.
character? Yeah, the skeleton servants.
They were
All
the
right.
best part.
They were great.
They
were
really
wonderful.
were. That was
So
a
much
good
fun.
choice that was made. I enjoyed
Yes.
it.
Oh man. Good stuff.
When I look at short story collections like these, I always wonder how they chose like the title story. Like why they went with The Return of the Sorcerer as like the title over all of these other crazy titles.
Yes. Do you guys have thoughts? Do you have thoughts on that?
Maybe it, which, I mean, now is a different time period, but like the draw to it for me was it felt like fantasy. And it was like the return of the sorcerer, like what happened. And maybe it was, because some of the other titles maybe aren't as attention grabbing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But
it felt like, for me, it felt like that middle title where like some of them were too crazy and they wouldn't get any readers.
Yeah.
And some of them were just like kind of boring in comparison, and they would be like, what is this even about?
Yeah.
But I felt like this also gave kind of a weird, very short summary of the book.
Yes.
You know,
I was thinking
like
that too. It does. It kind of introduces you to what to expect. Like, this is going to be a theme.
Yeah. Because there is a
Necromancers
lot
getting
of
their
like,
comeuppance.
you know, sorcery stuff, necromancer kind of stuff. But there's also, you know, the first main word in the title is return. And there's a lot of like travel in this book, going one place and coming back and going another place and coming back. And that's kind of a theme that I've noticed in a lot of these stories in one way or another, whether it's time travel or interdimensional travel or just different places.
Yes.
And Urza brings up a good point too, because they may have just chosen the story that did the best in Weird Tales and been like, oh, everybody seems to like this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who knows? But I think it does actually really give you a feel for the collection.
Yeah.
So. And it's short. It's like real short and punchy.
It definitely grabs your attention.
Yeah.
And it makes for a sweet cover.
It does.
Whereas it's like some of these other ones, like how exactly do you put these in the vaults of your Vombus in picture format? Like what would you put for the cover of the vaults of your Vombus? Besides, you know, our Martian civilizations. We could have just a collection of all of our creatures. The magical mummies and
oh my gosh,
skeleton servants. The spiders.
No,
that's amazing.
No.
No,
no spiders.
No.
I just want to see a book with the only thing on the cover is skeletons in servant uniforms. I would totally read that book.
I feel like if that was the case, it would set up this whole collection to be super funny. Like you would know, okay, this is going to be a funny book. Like that would totally set the tone like pretty differently from what it like was according to the cover. Like the cover is kind of intimidating, like the fire and all that stuff. But skeletons,
that would have been a Harlequin book.
Yeah. the Venus story.
Yeah.
Or is it can make an interesting cover? Yeah.
I love Fabio in the background
with them in their death embrace. Yeah. With the monks on this side throwing holy water at him.
I love
an illustrated version of this book.
Can we please?
Oh my gosh.
That would make such a great pulp cover.
What?
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
That's wonderful. Oh man.
I kind of pictured, I know Stephanie's read this book. I don't know if you have yet, Chrissy, but when I read about the skeleton servants, because I can't get over the skeleton servants.
Yeah.
My brain keeps picturing Chauncey from The House in the Cerulean Sea.
Oh, I haven't read that one yet.
But he's so much cuter.
He's much cuter than skeleton servants, but he's my favorite character in that book. And basically, without giving away spoilers, really, Chauncey is one of the kids in the house, and he's like this. The description on Amazon calls him the unidentifiable green blob, and his life goal is to be a bellhop.
And he loves to practice his
Yes,
bellhop
in front
skill.
of the mirror.
That's so cute.
I think you would
So
like
every
that.
time now we talk
Oh.
about skeleton servants, I just picture him with them.
I think I would like that. That sounds cute.
It's adorable.
It's a great book.
And
It's
there's
nice,
also-
heartwarming after the return of the
After this.
Sorcerer.
Yeah. Oh man.
It would be a good palate cleanser in between all that Russian lit.
Right.
And it's got a good message.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
I
a very
like how you
cute book.
segued into House in the Cerulean Sea. But
I just, for some reason, my mind, like, to me, the skeleton servants were never scary.
yeah.
First of all, because maybe I've watched way too many like kids movies, but I always pictured them like
Cartoony.
cartoony and like I think like the last movie I went to see in the theaters was like Hotel Transylvania with my niece way
Oh.
back before the pandemic started, and so I just
That'll do
picture
it.
like characters from that movie as the skeleton servants, and then somehow my brain transitioned to Chauncey in the House in the Cerulean Sea.
You know who else might fit into this book really well is Lucy.
Mhm.
Not my cat. Lucy from House in the
Lucy.
Cerulean Sea.
Lucy is the Antichrist.
Yeah, it's short for Lucifer.
Oh.
And they call him Lucy. And he likes classic rock and Motown music.
Yes.
It's adorable. But
I mean, all of those kids really could fit into here in one way or another, in a strange way.
This is the book hug book, right?
Yes.
What everybody calls the book hug? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's like these like I think like 6 kids in this house on this island that are like the like government of that world has determined they're dangerous. There's
Okay.
like Chauncey and there's Lucy and there's like a gnome and a sprite and a
Wyvern named Theodore.
yes
He's my favorite.
and a like Pomeranian. Like
Oh.
half werewolf, half Pomeranian.
It's
Oh
so
my
When he
gosh.
gets scared, he
weird.
turns into a Pomeranian.
Yeah, but it's the most charming, endearing book
Yeah.
ever. And I was sobbing at the end of it because
Oh.
it made me feel things.
But like they're all like such like unique, weird characters that in any other book would be, horrifying. That would weirdly fit into some of these stories.
Yeah. I would not have made that connection, but now that you say it, it totally fits.
We should just advertise this video now as the different literary connections of The Return of the Sorcerer that you wouldn't expect.
We have a whole list.
We really do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Influences from the future.
Oh my gosh. Oh yes, Ursa, you need to read it. I think you'll like it. I want everyone to read it.
So here's a different kind of question. We've talked about how much fun we think Clark Ashton Smith had writing some of these stories. What do you think was his favorite story to write?
Ooh.
Well, we know he liked to let loose on the poetry. So, maybe one of those would have been like his love child. Like, this is my favorite story. And I'm so sorry, dude. I probably skimmed that your favorite. I probably skimmed it.
Like the longer one. Which one was it? I'm not remembering the titles.
Maybe
I
the
feel
Dark
like it was
Eidolon.
one of the ones that I wrote meh by.
It was one of the middle stories, I think. Because the middle kind of sagged a bit.
Yeah.
Oh, what was it called? The Monster?
The Dark Idol.
maybe?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Was one that was
Mhm.
Yeah.
The Monster of the Prophecy. I just have question marks next to.
Yeah.
I had no idea what I read during that one.
Is that the one with the artist, the sculptor? I think it's the one with the
Oh,
sculptor
maybe.
where like his
Oh,
girlfriend gets stolen by demons
That could be.
at the end.
that's not the one I wanted though. I think, or is that A Night in Malniant? That one's super short.
That one was the really short one. That was like, just as I was trying to figuring out what story it was, it ended.
Oh yeah,
and I'm like, wait,
that was the short one
that was
where
it?
the girl just dies.
Yeah. I'm like,
The
what?
most racist favorite. That's definitely possible. There was one story that was like a Star Trek episode where it starts off with like the traditional horror stuff where it's like there's this misunderstood poet and he's stolen by an alien who recognizes his genius and brings him to a planet where everybody will recognize his genius. So he's brought to this planet and everybody looks at him like he's actually a beast from prophecy because he only has 2 legs, whereas they all have 7. So now he's weird for a different reason rather than just being lonely because he's a poet. He's lonely because he only has 2 limbs, on every limb. And then so he ends up getting left behind by the traveler who brings him to this planet, which was a great moment that I loved. He's just like, okay, I'm bored. So he steps back onto his time machine and leaves our narrator stranded to be like lowered into what I was picturing as like a giant jellyfish Venus flytrap thing that like poisons him. And that's like where the horror part comes in. And you're like, oh, this is going to be terrible. And yeah, Stephanie, this is the one you were describing recently. He ends up escaping and traveling to like the next country over and meets a lady with like 7 limbs of every kind. And she's also like a dark shade of green, but their minds just meld so well. And so he ends up falling in, like they have like a thing. So I was picturing him being like, if only like this was my life, Like I think he probably enjoyed
the woman
that
with
one.
7 limbs.
Yeah, I think
the woman with 7 limbs
is his favorite.
Yeah.
Like insert author into the story.
He wanted to be there. You could tell.
And that was also when he was in that, like, when he was trapped, that was some of the most disgusting yet beautifully described imagery.
Yeah.
Yeah. That scene was scary.
So gross. That's so...
Yeah. I have been stung by a jellyfish, and that's what I was picturing. I was just like, that all over. That sounds terrible.
The most racy one was his favorite.
Yeah. I think so.
Most likely.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, and I will say, even though the middle kind of sagged for me, just talking about all the stories, I think made up for it because it was so entertaining.
Yeah. Like, even the ones that as I was writing my notes for this live show, I didn't really remember at all. As we're talking about it, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. That was a crazy story. I think like most of my notes are just like, this story was funny because it surprised me to find this much humor in horror stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
or like
corny.
This story is so crazy I don't even know what happened.
Yes. And I learned not to try to cram all of them in at the last minute.
I couldn't do it either. It took me like a month and a half to read all of them.
Yeah, and I'm really bad about waiting till the last minute for book club books. And I should know better. But no. It was still a good time though.
Yeah.
I'm so glad.
So what did you guys, if you want to rate it, what was your final overall rating?
Well, for me, like on my initial read, I gave it a 3-star because it was, it was like a good, fun read, but it wasn't like great. I didn't think. For me, it was also hard for me to rate at first because I don't read a whole lot of books like this, so it's hard for me to rate books that I don't have a lot of experience in. So it was kind of like, I'm glad I read it. It was fun. It was a good read. I probably won't read it again, but now that we've been talking about it and I've been thinking about it more, it might bump up to like a 3.5 or even a 4 because I'm remembering details that like my readathon logged brain didn't remember when I first finished. Like I think my 3-star rating was more like, thank God that's done now.
Yeah.
Because that was insane. But now that I think back to like the actual stories and the stuff, I'm remembering that I enjoyed it more than I initially thought.
Yay. That makes me happy.
So I think it's like borderline 3.5, 4 stars in like that weird gray area.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I gave it a 3.5. Like, I enjoyed it, but just because the middle stories kind of sagged a bit for me. But I still thought it was original and unique,
Definitely.
and weird, and memorable. So I'm going to keep it at a 3.5. And I would probably reread some of these in the future.
Yeah. I would definitely reread some of the short stories. Maybe not the entire book, but definitely some of the stories. I think for me, it's closer to a 4 than a 3.5, just because I'm remembering so much of the stuff that I like unexpectedly enjoyed.
Yeah. So much unexpectedness. All the time.
I'll forever remember our skeleton servants.
Yeah. Hard pivot.
I just picture them with like little top hats on. Like tuxedos.
With the towel.
Yes.
So great. So wonderful. I think I usually do percentage grades. So honestly, I really just want to give this a full 100% because I had such a good time with it. But like, if I'm being really honest, I did struggle with certain stories. Certain stories didn't have that punchy ending that I had come to expect from him. Even though I always found something that I really liked in every single story that I read, except for the one that I kept falling asleep over. I think that this was a fantastic collection, despite the flaws, like with the women, not being the best representation and stuff like that. Like, it's definitely flawed, but like I had such an astronomical amount of fun reading this, and especially reading it with you ladies. Just, it made me happy to have company. So I think I'm gonna go with a 95 on this one.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
I loved it.
Awesome.
Is there anything else that you guys want to discuss tonight? Is there anything we didn't get to?
I don't think
So, fun fact, Gene Wolfe.
Oh yeah.
We learned this right before the live show. Gene Wolfe, the guy who blurbed on the cover, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
He was an industrial engineer, and he helped invent the machine that made Pringles.
Fun fact from Stephanie.
And that was my favorite thing that I learned all day today.
So great. That's true. I should say I discovered this collection because of Gene Wolfe, because I loved his book of the New Sun, and I was like, I need to read your influences. So, and I can definitely see the influence here for sure. So, and I love that he was partially responsible for the creation of Pringles. That is such good knowledge.
And this definitely makes me want to look into Gene Wolfe. I think it would be interesting. With as much fun as I had with this one.
Somebody's doing a buddy read of it in Shelf Space this year. I forget what month it is though.
Okay. I'll check
the first one, the Book of the New Sun.
Okay.
I'm planning on reading it if I possibly can. So we'll see.
Nice.
Well, if that's everything, thank you to our fabulous audience that joined us tonight.
Thank you, Urza.
Thank you, Urza. I think we had a couple other people there at one point that were just lurking.
Yeah.
Thing being like, what are they talking about?
I thought it was on this other. Thank you, Stephanie and Christy, for joining me tonight. This has been so much fun. So
Yes.
much
It
fun.
was.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, ladies, for joining me. Craziness. Crazy book.
Have a fabulous night, everyone, in the future.
Bye.